You said that ever since you were young, you wanted to be a builder, that you loved the idea of designing beautiful city skylines, especially in New York City. I love the New York City skyline. So, describe the origins of that love of building.
I think there's both an incredible confidence and a total insecurity that comes with youth. So I remember at 15, I would look out over the city skyline from my bedroom window in New York and imagine where I could contribute and add value in a way that, I look back on and completely laugh at, how confident I was. But I've known since some of my earliest memories it's something I've wanted to do. And I think I love art. I love expressions of beauty in so many different forms. Um, with architecture, there's the tangible. And I think that marriage of function and something that exists beyond yourself is very compelling. I also grew up in a family where my mother was in the real estate business working alongside my father. My father was in the business, and I saw the joy that it brought to them. So I think I had these natural positive associations. They used to send me as a little girl renderings of projects they were about to embark on with notes asking if I would hurry up and finish school so I could come join them. So I had these positive associations, but it came from something within myself. I think that as I got older and as I got involved in real estate, I realized that it was so multidisciplinary. You have, of course, the design, but you also have engineering, the brass tacks of construction. There's time management, there's project planning, just the duration of time to complete one of these iconic structures. It's enormous. You can contribute a decade of your life to one project. So while you have to think big picture, it means you really have to care deeply about the details because you live with them. So it allowed me to flex a lot of areas of interest.
I love that confidence of youth.
It's funny because we're all so insecure, right, in the most basic interactions, but yet our ambitions are so unbridled in a way that kind of like makes you blush as an adult. And I think it's fun. It's fun to like tap into that energy.
Yeah, where everything is possible. I think
Yeah.
some of the greatest builders I've ever met kind of always have that little flame of everything is possible still burning. That is a silly notion from youth, but it's not so silly.
Yeah.
Everybody tells you something is impossible, but if you continue believing that it's possible and have that sort of naive notion that you could do it, even if it's exceptionally difficult, that naive notion turns into some of the greatest projects ever done.
100%.
Going out to space or building a new company where like everybody said it's impossible, taking on that gigantic company and disrupting them and revolutionizing how stuff is done, or doing into huge building projects where, like you said, so many people are involved in making that happen.
We get conditioned out of that feeling.
Yeah.
We start to become insecure, and we start to rely on the input or validation of others, and it takes us away from that sort of core drive and ambition. So it's fun to reflect on that and also to smile, right? Because whether you can execute or not, time will tell. but yeah, no, that was very much my childhood.
Yeah, of course, it's important to also have the humility of once you get humbled and realize that it's actually a lot of work to
Yeah.
build. I still am amazed just looking at big buildings, big bridges, that human beings are able to get together and build those things. That's one of my favorite things about architecture, just like, wow.
Yeah.
It's a manifestation of the fact that humans can collaborate and do something like epic, much bigger than themselves. And it's like a statue that represents that, and it could
Yeah.
be there for a long time.
I think in some ways you look out at different city skylines and it's almost like a visual depiction of ambition realized, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a testament to somebody's dream, not somebody, a whole ensemble of people's dreams and visions and triumphs, and in some cases, failures if the projects weren't properly executed. So you look at these skylines and it's a testament to that. I actually heard once architecture described as frozen music. That really resonated with me.
I love thinking about a city skyline as an ensemble of dreams realized.
Yeah. I remember the first time I went to Dubai, and I was watching them dredging out and creating these man-made islands. And I remember somebody once saying to me, they're an architect actually who collaborated with us on our tower in Chicago. He said that the only thing that limited what an architect could do in that area was gravity and imagination. so, so it's.
Yeah, but gravity is a tricky one to work against. And that's where civil engineering is one of my favorite things. I used to build bridges in high school for physics classes. You have to build bridges and you compete on how much weight they can carry relative to their own weight.
Yeah.
You study how good it is by finding its breaking point. And that was a deep appreciation for me on the miniature scale of on the large scale what people are able to do with civil engineering.
Yeah.
Because gravity is a tricky one to fight against.
It definitely is. And bridges, I mean, some of the iconic designs in our country are incredible bridges.
So if we think of skylines as ensembles of dreams realized,
Hmm.
you spent quite a bit of time in New York. What do you love about and what do you think about the New York City skyline? What's a good picture? We're looking here at a few. I mean, looking over the
Yeah.
water.
Well, I think the water is an unbelievable feature of the New York skyline. As you see the island on approach, and oftentimes you'll see, like in these images, you'll see these towers reflecting off of the water surface. So I think there's something very beautiful and unique about that. When I look at New York, I see this unbelievable sort of tapestry of different types of architecture. So you have the Gothic form as represented by buildings like the Woolworth Building, or you'll have Art Deco as represented by buildings like 40 Wall Street or the Chrysler Building or Rockefeller Center. And then you'll have these unbelievable super modern examples or modernist examples like Lever House and Seagram's House. So you have all of these different styles. And I think to build in New York, you're really building the best of the best. So nobody's giving New York their sort of second-rate work. And especially when a lot of those buildings were built, there was this incredible competition happening between New York and Chicago for kind of dominance of the sky and for who could create the greatest skyline. This sort of race to the sky when skyscrapers were first being built, starting in Chicago and then New York surpassing that in terms of height, at least, with the Empire State Building. So I love sort of contextualizing the skylines as well and thinking back to when different components that are so iconic were added and the context in which they came into being.
I got to ask you about this. There's a pretty cool page that I've been following on X, Architecture and Tradition, and they celebrate sort of traditional schools of architecture. And you mentioned Gothic, the tapestry. This is in Chicago, the Tribune Tower in Chicago. So what do you think about that? Sort of the old and the new mixed together. Do you like Gothic?
I think it's hard to look at something like the Tribune Tower and not be completely in awe. Like, this is an unbelievable building. Look at those buttresses, and you've got gargoyles hanging off of it.
Yeah.
And, this style was reminiscent of the cathedrals of Europe, which was very kind of in vogue in like the 1920s here in America. Actually, I mentioned the Woolworth Tower before. The Woolworth Tower was actually referred to as the Cathedral of Commerce. And because it also was in that Gothic style.
Amazing.
So this was built maybe a decade before the Tribune Building. But the Tribune Building to me is it's almost not replicable. It personally really resonates with me because one of the first projects I ever worked on was building Trump Chicago, which was this beautiful, elegant, super modern, all glass skyscraper right across the way. So it was right across the river. So I would look out the windows as it was under construction or be standing quite literally on rebar of the building looking out at the Tribune and incredibly inspired. And now the reflective glass of the building reflects back not only the river, but also the Tribune Building and other buildings on Michigan Avenue.
Do you like it when the reflective properties of the glass is part of the architecture?
I think it depends. Like they have super reflective glass that sometimes doesn't work. It's distracting, and I think it's one component of sort of a composition that comes together. I think in this case, the glass on Trump Chicago is very beautiful. It was designed by Adrian Smith of Skidmore, Owings and Merrill, a major architecture firm, who actually did the Burj Khalifa in Dubai, which is, I think, like an awe-inspiring example of modern architecture. But glass is tricky. You have to get the shade right. Some glass has a lot of iron in it and gets super green. And that's a choice. And sometimes you have more blue properties, blue silver, like you see here. But it's part of the character.
How do you know what it's actually going to look like when it's done? Like, is it possible to imagine that? Because it feels like there's so many variables.
I think so. I think if you have a vivid imagination and if you
Yeah.
sit with it, and then if you also go beyond the rendering, right? You have to live with the materials. So you don't build a 92-story building, glass curtain wall, and not deeply examine the actual curtain wall before purchasing it. So you have to spend a lot of time with the actual materials, not just the beautiful sort of artistic renderings, which can be incredibly misleading. The goal is actually that the end result is much, much more compelling than what the architect or artist rendered. But oftentimes that's very much not the case. Sometimes also you mentioned context, sometimes I'll see renderings of buildings. I'm like, wait, what about the building right to the left of it that's blocking 80% of its views of the, architects, they'll remove things that are inconvenient. So you have to be rooted
In reality.
in reality. Exactly.
And I love the notion of living with the materials in contrast to
Yeah.
living in the imagined world of the drawings.
Yeah.
So the both are probably important because you have to dream the thing into existence, but you also have to be rooted in like what the thing is actually going to look like in the context of everything else.
100%.
One of the underlying principles of the page I just mentioned, and I hear folks mention this a lot, is that modern architecture is kind of boring, that it lacks soul and beauty. And you just spoke with admiration for both modern and for Gothic, for older architecture. So do you think there's truth that modern architecture is boring?
I'm living in Miami currently, so I see a lot of super uninspired glass boxes on the waterfront, but I think exceptional things shouldn't be the norm. They're typically rare. So, and I think in modern architecture, you find an abundance of amazing examples of super compelling and innovative building designs. I mean, I mentioned the Burj Khalifa. It is awe-inspiring. This is an unbelievably striking example of modern architecture. You look at some older examples, the Sydney Opera House, and so I think there's unbelievable. There you go. I mean, it's like a needle in the sky.
Yeah, reaching out to the stars.
It's huge, and in the context of a city where there's a lot of height,
Yeah.
so it's unbelievable. But I think one of the things that's probably exciting me the most about architecture right now is the innovation that's happening within it. There's example of robotic fabrication. There's 3D printing. Your friend and who you introduced me to not too long ago, Neri Oxman, what she's doing at the intersection of biology and technology, and thinking about how to create more sustainable development practices, quite literally trying to create materials that will biodegrade back into the earth. I think there's something really cool happening now with the rediscovery of ancient building techniques. So you have self-healing concrete that was used by the Romans, an art and a practice of using volcanic ash and lime that's now being rediscovered and is more critical than ever as we think about how much of our infrastructure relies on concrete and how much of that is failing on the most basic levels. So I think actually it's a really, really exciting time for innovation in architecture. And I think there are some incredible examples of of modern design that are really exciting. But generally, I think Roosevelt said that comparison is the thief of joy. So
Yeah.
it's hard. You look at the Tribune building, you look at some of these iconic structures. One of the buildings I'm most proud to have worked on was the historic old post office building in Washington, D.C. You look at a building like that, and it feels like it has no equal.
Also, there's just a psychological element where people tend to want to complain about the new and celebrate the old. Uh,
Always. It's like the
so
history of time. So,
there's just people are always kind of skeptical and concerned about change.
yeah.
And it's true that there's a lot of stuff that's new that's not good. It's not going to last. It's not going to stand the test of time. But some things will. And there's just like in modern art, and modern music, there's going to be artists that stand the test of time, and we'll later look back and celebrate them. Those were the good times.
Yeah.
When you just step back, what do you love about architecture? Is it the beauty? Is it the function?
I'm most emotionally drawn, obviously, to the beauty. But I think as somebody who's built things, I really believe that the form has to follow the function. Like there's nothing uglier than a space that is ill-conceived, that otherwise it's decoration. And I think that after sort of that initial reaction to seeing something that's aesthetically really pleasing to me when I look at a building or a project, I love sort of thinking about how it's being used. So having been able to build so many things and in my career and worked on so many incredible projects. I mean, it's really, really rewarding after the fact to have somebody come up to you and tell you that they got engaged in the lobby of your building, or they got married in the ballroom, and share with you some of those experiences. So to me, that's equally as beautiful. The use cases for these unbelievable projects, but I think it's all of it. I love that you've got the construction, and you've got the design, and you've got then the interior design, and you've got the financing elements, the marketing elements, and it's all wrapped up in this one effort. So to me, it's exciting to sort of flex in all those different ways.
Yeah, like you says, it's dreams realized, hard work realized. I mean, probably on the bridge side is why I love the function. In terms of function being primary, you just think of like the millions
Oh my gosh, look
of
at that.
bridges. Uh,
Go down. You had Look at that.
yeah, this is Devil's Bridge in Germany.
Yeah. I wouldn't say it's like the most practical design,
Well, this,
but look how beautiful that is.
yeah, so this is probably, well, we don't know. We need to interview some people whether the function holds up, but in terms of beauty, and then like what we're talking about, using the water for the
Yeah.
reflection and the shape that creates. I mean, there's an elegance to the shape of a bridge.
See, it's interesting that they call it Devil's Bridge, because to me, this is very ethereal. I think about the ring, the circle,
Yeah.
life.
There's nothing about this that makes me feel maybe they're just being ironic in the
Unless
name.
that function's really flawed.
Yeah, exactly. Maybe
Nobody's ever successfully crossed
could
it.
cross the bridge. Yeah, but I mean, to me, there's just iconic. I love looking at bridges
Yeah.
because of the function. It's the Brooklyn Bridge or the Golden Gate Bridge. I mean, those are probably my favorites in the United States. Just in a city to be able to look out and see the skyline combined with the suspension bridge, and thinking of all the millions of cars that pass, like the busyness, like us humans getting together and going to work, building cool stuff, and just the bridge kind of represents the turmoil and the busyness of a city as it creates. It's cool.
And the connectivity as well.
Yeah, the network of roads all come together. So the bridge is the ultimate combination of function and beauty.
Yeah. I remember when I was first learning about bridges, studying the cable stay versus the suspension bridge. And I mean, you actually built many replicas, so I'm sure you'll have a point of view on this, but they really are so beautiful. And you mentioned the Brooklyn Bridge, but growing up in New York, that was as much a part of the architectural story and tapestry of that skyline as any building that's seen in it. So,
What in general is your philosophy of design and building and architecture?
well, some of the most recent projects I worked on prior to government service were the old post office building
Mhm.
and almost simultaneously Trump Doral in Miami. So these were both two just massive undertakings, both redevelopments, which in a lot of cases, having worked on ground up construction, redevelopment projects are in a lot of ways much more complicated because you have existing attributes, but also a lot of limitations you have to work within, especially when you're repurposing a use. So this, the old post office building on Pennsylvania Avenue
So
was,
beautiful.
it's unbelievable. So this was a Romanesque revival building built in the 1890s on America's Main Street to symbolize American grandeur. And at the time, there were post office being built in the style across the country, but this being really the defining one. Still to this day, the tallest habitable structure in Washington, the tallest structure being the monument, the nation's only vertical park, which is that clock tower. But you've got these thick granite walls, those carved granite turrets, just an unbelievable building. You've got this massive atrium that runs through the whole center of it that is topped with glass. So having the opportunity to spearhead a project like that was so exciting. And actually, it was my first renovation project. So I came to it with a tremendous amount of energy, vigor, and humility about how to do it properly, ensuring I had all the right people. We had countless federal and local government agencies that would oversee every single decision we made. But in advance of even having the opportunity to do it, there was a close to 2-year request for proposal, like a process that was put out by the General Services Administration. So it was this really arduous government procurement process that we were competing against so many different people for the opportunity, which a lot of people said it was a gigantic waste of time. But I looked at that, and I think so did a lot of the other bidders, and say it's worth trying to put the best vision forward.
So
And
you fell in love with this project,
I
like
fell in
it's
love. Yeah.
so. Is there some interesting details about what it takes to do renovation? Is there about some of the challenges or opportunities? Because you want to maintain the beauty of the old
Yeah.
and now like upgrade the functionality, I guess, and maybe modernize some aspects of it without destroying what made the building magical in the first place.
So I think the greatest asset was already there.
Hmm.
The exterior of the building, which we meticulously restored, and any addition to it had to be done sort of very gently in terms of any signage additions. And um, the interior spaces were completely dilapidated. It had been in a post office, then was used for a really rundown food court and government office spaces. It was actually losing $6 million a year when we got the concession to build it, and when we won and became one of, I think, a great example of public-private partnerships working together. But I think the biggest challenge in having such a radical use conversion is just how you lay it out. So the amount of time I would get on that Excella twice a week, 3 times a week to spend day trips down in Washington. And we would walk every single inch of the building, laying out the floor plans, debating over the configuration of a room. There were almost 300 rooms and there were almost 300 layouts. So nothing could be repeated. Whereas
Wow.
when you're building from scratch, you tend, you have a box and you decide where you want to add
Mhm.
potential elements, and you kind of can stack the floor plan all the way up. But when you're working within a building like this, every single room was different. You see the setback. So the setback then required you to move the plumbing. So there was no, it was really a labor of love. And to do something like this, and that's why I think renovation, we had it with Doral as well. It was 700 rooms over 650 acres of property. And so every single unit was very different and complicated. Not as complicated in some ways. The scale of it was so massive, but not as complicated as the old post office. But
So
it required a level of precision. And I think in real estate, you have a lot of people who design on plan, and a lot of people who are in the business of sort of acquiring and flipping. So it's more financial engineering than it is building. And they don't spend the time sort of sweating these details that make something great and make something functional. And you feel it in the end result. But I mean, blood, sweat, tears, years of my life for those projects, and it was worth it. I enjoyed almost, I enjoyed almost every minute of it.
So to you, it's not about the flipping. To you, it's about the art of the and the function of the thing that you're creating.
100%.
What's design on plan? I'm learning new things today.
When proposals are put forth by an architect and really just the plan is accepted without, and in the case of a renovation, like if you're not walking those rooms, the number of times a beautifully laid out room was on a blueprint, and then I'd go to Washington and I'd walk that floor and I'd realize that there was a column that ran right up through the middle of the space where, the bed was supposed to be, or the toilet was supposed to be, or the shower. So there's a lot of things that are missed when you do something conceptually without sort of rooting it in the actual structure. And that's why I think even, with ground up construction as well, people who aren't constantly on their job sites, constantly walking the projects, there's just there's a lot that's missed.
I mean, there's a wisdom to the idea that we talked about before, live with the materials and walking the construction site, walking the rooms. I mean, that's what you hear from people like Steve Jobs, like Elon.
Yeah.
That's why you live on the factory floor. That's why
Yeah.
you constantly obsess about the details, the actual, not of the plans, but the physical reality of the product. I mean, the insanity of Steve Jobs and Johnny Ive working together on like making it perfect, making the iPhone, the early designs, prototypes, making that perfect, like what it actually feels like in the hand. You have to be there, like as close to the metal as possible to truly understand.
And you have to love it in order to do that.
Right. It shouldn't be about the how much it's going to sell for or
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff. You have to love the art.
Because for the most part, you can probably get 90, maybe even 95% of the end result, unless something has terribly gone awry by not caring with that level of almost like maniacal precision. But you'll notice that 10% for the rest of your life. So I think that extra effort, that passion, I think that's what separates good from great.